Hey everyone, welcome. Today we're diving into a really fascinating and honestly a deeply important explainer. We're talking about weaving the social safety net in India. We usually think of our families as the ultimate fallback, right? The people who will literally always be there. But what happens when they just can't be? When things like severe poverty, illness, or some sudden crisis push a family completely past its breaking point? Well, today, we're going to explore exactly how society steps in to catch its most vulnerable people before they fall through the cracks.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's our roadmap for today. First up, the safety net's foundation. Then we'll move into safeguarding India's children, channeling youth energy, dignity for the elderly, and we'll wrap it all up with the professional weaver's toolkit.
So starting off with part 1, the safety net's foundation, when families reach their limit.
To really grasp how our social institutions work, we kind of have to challenge a really common assumption, and that's the idea that the family unit can just handle absolutely every crisis thrown its way. The transfer of care model perfectly illustrates why this isn't always the case. By default, yes, the family is the basic unit providing for us across our entire life cycle, but there's a breaking point. Families just can't always provide specialized care. When hit by extreme poverty, geographical isolation, or sudden disasters, families can be left without even the most basic survival resources. And that, right there, is the trigger for institutional step-in. When family resources fail, broader societal structures like the state, NGOs, and community programs literally have to step up and weave a wider safety net to make sure people get holistic care and protection.
Just to ground us in why this state intervention is absolutely non-negotiable, let's look at the reality on the ground. Based on data from 2011 to 2012, nearly 30% of the population, that is more than a quarter of the country, was living below the poverty line. We're talking about less than a third of people having access to adequate sanitation. Less than 50% of deliveries were handled by trained birth attendants, which has a massive impact on maternal and infant mortality. And incredibly, less than half of households consumed iodized salt, which can actually stunt physical and mental growth. When the baseline is under this much strain, relying solely on the family, it's just impossible. Society has to intervene.
So who exactly are the people falling through these cracks? The source material gives us a spot-on definition. Vulnerability refers to individuals or groups who are more likely to be affected by adverse circumstances, and upon whom these circumstances have a disproportionately harmful impact. Basically, the root cause is a gap. When an individual's daily needs outgrow their environment's capacity to meet them, that's where vulnerability is born. And for the groups we're about to look at, having these needs go unmet drastically alters the entire trajectory of their lives.
Which brings us to Section 2, safeguarding India's children and protecting that crucial window of development. Childhood is this period of incredibly rapid, totally interconnected growth. Think of it like a set of interlocking gears. Optimal growth needs a synchronized environment that provides mental, physical, and emotional support. We're talking food, shelter, healthcare, but also love and stimulation. And because these gears are all linked, if a need goes unmet in one area, it instantly jams up the others. If a child is living in difficult circumstances without a safety net, they simply can't reach their full potential. And those adverse impacts, they're often permanent.
The scale of this crisis is honestly staggering. Nearly 2/3 of children under 5 suffer from malnutrition. 3 million kids are living on the streets without adequate shelter. And these aren't just numbers on a page, these are millions of individual lives. Less than half of children aged 6 to 14 even go to school. And official estimates show over 17 million children working as laborers. Every single one of those numbers represents a life dealing with the permanent impacts of unmet needs. So a massive, formalized safety net isn't just a nice-to-have, it's the only logical response.
Legally speaking, how does the state even begin to untangle a crisis this big? Well, they use the Juvenile Justice Act of 2000, which neatly splits the intervention into two main categories. On one side, you've got children in conflict with law, essentially juvenile delinquents. Here, the system focuses heavily on child-friendly adjudication, specialized treatment, and rehabilitation, rather than just tossing them into the adult penal system. On the flip side, you have children in need of care and protection. These are the victims of their environment. Homeless, abused, trafficked, or orphan kids who desperately require immediate institutional support and guardianship.
So what do these solutions actually look like on the ground? Well, we rely on three massive pillars. First up is the ICDS, or the Integrated Child Development Services Scheme, mostly operating through Anganwadis. This is literally the world's largest early childhood program, delivering health, nutrition, and preschool education to 41 million kids under 6. It's huge. Second, we have NGOs like SOS Children's Villages.
They provide long-term, family-based care, where a dedicated mother looks after 10 to 15 orphan children in a really integrated village setup. And third, there's CARA, the Central Adoption Resource Authority. This is a strict, government-regulated legal framework that makes absolutely sure adoptions are safe and that the rights of the child are fiercely protected.
All right, let's move on to Section 3, channeling youth energy and navigating that incredibly tricky transition. For youth, and we're talking about folks between 15 and 29 here, I kind of like to think of this phase as a pressure cooker, right? A young person is suddenly dealing with massive biological shifts that completely reshape their identity. They're facing intense social strain and peer pressure in a super competitive world. And at the exact same time, there's this urgent pressure to prepare for adulthood, securing a livelihood, getting ready for marriage, maybe raising a family. Without a solid safety net, the stress inside this pressure cooker can easily boil over into maladaptive coping mechanisms. We're talking rising rates of substance abuse and really risky health choices. And the thing is, this pressure is not distributed equally. At all. You have rural and tribal youth dealing with extreme geographical isolation. Others are navigating huge systemic barriers because of disabilities or severe trauma. Victims of difficult circumstances like trafficked youth or street children need completely different, highly specialized support. Out-of-school youth lack the formal credentials they need to compete in the job market, and female adolescents face the heavy added burden of pervasive gender discrimination plus very specific reproductive health risks. These challenges are deeply, deeply interconnected.
So how does society catch them when they fall? Well, by taking all that intense youth energy and actively channeling it into something positive. Programs like the National Service Scheme, or NSS, bring college students directly into national development projects, like sanitation drives and disaster relief. Then you have government-backed programs like Scouts and Guides that are all about rigorous teamwork and character building. And crucially, for the rural youth who might not be in school, there are the Nehru Yuva Kendras. These centers facilitate adult education, vocational training, and youth clubs to help build genuine, lasting self-reliance.
Moving on to Section 4, dignity for the elderly and how we manage this massive demographic shift. On paper, it is an incredible demographic success story. Life expectancy in India jumped from roughly 29 years back in 1947 to over 65 years today. That's amazing! But this massive success has also created a really complex logistical challenge. We now have the second largest senior population in the entire world. And get this, 80% of these seniors live in rural areas, which makes healthcare delivery incredibly difficult. On top of that, we're seeing a rapid rise in the older old, people living well past 80. And tragically, 30% of senior citizens in India are living entirely below the poverty line.
The elderly are facing this uniquely devastating dual challenge. On one hand, you have the undeniable physical decline. There's increased vulnerability to disease, loss of mobility from things like arthritis, sensory loss, and eventually the inability to just care for themselves. But honestly, equally damaging is the social isolation. You've got emptiness syndrome, financial dependency on a younger generation that's already facing its own intense economic pressures, and urban fragmentation. City life and cramped spaces are literally eroding the traditional joint family network. Because of all this, seniors are increasingly left isolated, sometimes even feeling like they've become burdens.
So the safety net here absolutely must provide dignity. Mobile Medicare units are a huge part of this, specifically designed to reach that 80% living in isolated rural areas to give them immediate medical attention. For social and physical shelter, there's a whole network of institutional care. This includes old age homes, multi-service centers that offer real companionship, and continuous care facilities for dementia patients. And crucially, to fight that devastating 30% poverty rate, the state runs the National Old Age Pension Scheme, or NOAPS. This provides direct, financial subsistence support to destitute seniors over 65 who don't have a regular income or family backing. It's a literal lifeline.
Finally, let's look at Section 5, the Professional Weaver's Toolkit, and the careers in social work that make all this possible.
You see, all of these initiatives, from the Anganawadis for kids to the old age pensions for seniors, they don't just magically happen. They require highly trained professionals to keep them running. But here's the thing, empathy alone just isn't enough. True professionals need a really balanced dual toolkit. On one side, yes, you absolutely need people skills. You have to build community linkage so the public feels ownership of these programs, and you need to foster harmony between the staff and the people you're helping. But on the other side, you need razor-sharp administrative skills. You've got to navigate complex government bureaucracy for funding, engage the private sector for corporate social responsibility, and operate as an objective manager who can actually evaluate if a program is making a real-world impact.
If you're listening to this and feeling passionate about it, you should know there are incredibly structured educational and career pathways out there. Building on an undergraduate foundation in something like home science or social work, you can scale through multiple levels of impact. You might start out as a functionary, operating right at the ground level, delivering programs directly to the people. From there, you could move up to a manager, overseeing logistics and personnel for big institutions. With a bit more experience, you might step into a researcher role, consulting and evaluating how well these massive social programs are actually working. Or you could even become an entrepreneur, setting up your very own independent NGOs and designing completely innovative community interventions from scratch.
I want to leave you with this final, somewhat provocative thought. A civilized society is ultimately measured by how it cares for those who fall through the cracks. Managing these support services isn't just some dry administrative task. It's the active daily work of weaving a safety net that protects the development of our children, the massive potential of our youth, and the absolute dignity of our elderly. The frameworks and the institutions, they are already there, but they desperately need skilled, empathetic leaders to step up and run them. So the question is, are you ready to be one of them? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, stay curious, and I'll catch you next time.